Hey, John.
Hey, Eric.
Are you working now?
Yes, it looks like it's working this time. All right. Third time's the charm. We can click a button.
We have the power.
Yes, we are technical masters of our universes. So, hey.
Episode 50.
Yeah, welcome to Mostly Security, episode 50. That means we've been doing this for almost a year.
Who'd have thought?
All right. Well done. So, Thanksgiving, huh?
Yeah. Looking forward to the turkey tomorrow.
I'm looking forward to the meal tomorrow. We've got, I don't know, something like 20 people coming over. And this is, I forget if I talked about it on the podcast or not. I assume I did because it was a big thing for me this past summer. But we raised our own turkeys this year.
Right.
And so this is actually the first one that we will be eating. So... and it's a big one. It's a 31.6 pound turkey, which is ironically not as big as last year's. So, but
Cooking in about a couple hours.
As soon as we stop recording this, which we're recording the night before Thanksgiving, even though this will probably not go out until after Thanksgiving because I don't intend to edit it tomorrow. I have to go upstairs and get the turkey out of the brine and clean it up and put it in the oven. And then it'll cook low and slow for about 15 hours.
Nice.
Yes.
We arrived this afternoon. We're having Thanksgiving at Grandma's house. And so 12 hours in the car. And now we're at Grandma's house. And when we walked in the door, the tables were already all set.
Oh my gosh.
Apparently they've been set for 2 days.
Excited, is she?
Preparing for everybody. Yes, there's probably, I think it's going to be 15. So not 20, but a large group. It'll be fun.
20 is not a precise number. Shirley probably knows exactly how many people are coming. I'm just saying a lot.
A lot.
Enough that we can have the classic kids table, adults table, and the extras table.
Yeah. Once I run out of fingers, it's just a big number.
Yeah. It's all good.
Well, cool. We'll get moving forward then.
All right. Well, I had one brief bit of follow-up that I threw in Slack this week, which was an article about why software remains insecure. And, this is not really technically follow-up, but I guess. But we talked about this in episode 42. I went and had to go look that up, which is, just a few weeks ago or, I guess a month or two. And this is an article, it was on CBS News, the reason why companies don't fix cybersecurity. And there's a bunch of data about how much is invested in. And, the long and the short of it is, as we talked about in that episode, is because the companies will often make cost trade-offs and say, well, the risk of loss is only X. And in order for me to actually protect against that, I have to spend Y, and Y times probability of X is greater than, whatever the actual cost is. And, so, there's often enough investment to have, I guess, plausible deniability for culpability, something along those lines. But this article is also, it's worth reading. And it was, as somebody who, I guess many engineers probably view the world in shades of black and white. And I would like to think that we would all do what we can and what is reasonable and more than reasonable for, what's quote unquote the right thing to do. But that isn't often the case, as I am reminded over and over.
So is it fair to say that cybersecurity issues is basically an actuarial exercise for
that is a very fair thing to say. Yes. Yeah, I think in many cases that's right. And they used in this article they used examples for the Target breach, the Home Depot breach, I don't think they used the Yahoo. I don't remember it, at least. And Sony was the other one that they really did, because I mean Sony's was that 2 or 3 years ago now at this point. That was a brutal hack, and Sony took months to get back, but at the end of the day, if you look at the actual cost of those breaches, which were all massive, it wound up being a relatively small part of the revenues. At the end of the day, the companies weren't materially impacted in their ability to continue doing business and acquire customers. And anyway, yeah, somewhat of a depressing article for somebody in the security business, I would say. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's jump into topics. How about I go first tonight?
Sure.
I just had one article, which is an article of something that I am definitely not an expert in, I would say. But the thing that I really liked about this article was how much background they went into to kind of set the stage. So this is an article by Duo Security, which was bought by Cisco a few months ago. And it's about the secure boot in the T2 chip in Apple hardware. So what the T2 is it's basically a coprocessor that is, it was introduced in the iMac Pro, I believe, this past summer. And it's been added to the latest versions of their MacBook Pros, as well as the new Mac Mini that they announced just at the end of October. It might be in a couple others. I don't know. I haven't been following that closely, but I do know that it's responsible for a number of the security features. It basically runs a secure enclave, and Touch ID, and it also is responsible for the hard drive controllers, and that is I'm really, you should probably not trust what I say on this, because it's not like I've researched it, but as I recall, it's because they can then do seamless and very performant encryption in transit, and that they get better performance by offloading the disk control to this coprocessor. So and the performance numbers on the iMac Pro were pretty crazy with SSDs, and
right.
And I some number of that was attributed to the T2. But anyway, one of the things that's responsible for is the secure boot, which is essentially how do you know that the software that's running on your computer is legitimate? And secure boot attempts to basically prove that the software from the first line of code that's executed to essentially power on the CPU is validated as authentic. And this is because just as a general rule, as a piece of security software, if something is lower in the stack than you are, then it can hide from you. Right? Because it would have the ability to see requests before you can handle them, and effectively lie, right? So you ask for, imagine if you're in user mode and the kernel is compromised, then you ask for something in user mode and the kernel lies to you, or you get to kernel and you're asking for something and the hardware lies to you. In this case, the secure boot attempts to have a validation chain all the way up from the time the first BIOS bits are loaded all the way up through the operating system.
It's not a simple Wimpy chip either. It's a 64-bit ARM
Right.
processor, the same thing that runs in some of the older iPhones, not the brand new ones, but this is a high-powered chip that can do large amounts of things.
Correct. This isn't, yeah. This is a legitimate chip. I don't know what the equivalent of T2 to the A series would be in terms of performance goes or anything like that.
A10.
Really?
It's the A10 processor that's in the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus. Yeah.
It's that. I didn't realize it was that powerful. Dang.
Yep.
Dang. Yes. Okay. So it is, yes, like you say, it is not a wimpy chip. So, so anyway, the cool thing about this article is it goes through basically the process of secure boot, at least in the Apple phase. And Intel has a bunch of work along these lines too with, the Intel controlled secure boot, but Apple's offloaded this to, their coprocessor, and
right.
they don't use the on chip enclaves like we talked about, I don't know, a while back, the SGX secure guard extensions that are in the Intel CPUs.
Right.
But so anyway, so the cool thing about this is that they go through everything from, who first sort of gets the first line of code that gets to turn on the CPU in reset mode, and basically what the different steps are. And this is, this is what really drew me to this article, because I found it illuminating. I'm not, I wouldn't consider myself a hardware guy in any shape of the word, but I'm interested in particular because I think this has big implications for, security in general as we move forward, into the future. So I guess the other comment about this, though, is that Apple doesn't really talk much about this. So this is a lot of reverse engineering of the boot process, and from update images. So, if you have a BIOS update, you could take it apart and look at the symbols and, look at the code and basically try to reconstruct what it's doing, which is, I think the main, where they get most of the data here.
Yep.
So this goes through, like I said, everything about how the data is loaded, how the CPU is essentially hands off to the coprocessor, the T2, to invoke, how it's initialized, and blah 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 blah. We can kind of jump ahead to the end here, because really, 90% of this article is on setup, is on sort of background information. So, and then at the very end, they have pages and pages. Well, I don't know what the equivalent of printed pages would be, but the scroll bar is near the bottom. Pages and pages of describing them, and then they have basically 4 or 5 paragraphs of analysis that basically says, well, so what's the implications? And the main implication is that there's still a hole in the boot process. And so let me actually read. I pulled a quick little couple sentences here that I thought were telling. Due to the way ME configuration, so ME is management engine, and NVRAM regions are utilized, the firmware image is not reloaded from a known good source every use and is hot patched on first initialization. This means that the loaded UEFI, which is the BIOS, firmware image is persistent across x86 reboots and is mutable. So, basically the actual image isn't burnt and verified every time it gets loaded. So I'm sorry, this is me speaking again, which means that, and if that can be changed, so if it's mutable, which it says it is, and if it can be changed in any way and persists across reboots, then if you can alter that, then that would be the target. So let me go back to reading here. So, which in turn means if an attacker were able to execute kernel mode code on the T2, they would be able to modify the earliest of x86 code in SEC phase to be executed before any of the platform integrity features are enabled, effectively taking control of the boot process. This sounds like a pretty big if, but there lies the crux of the T2. It does too much. Which is essentially what you just said. It's a powerful thing. Yes, I mean, it essentially runs iOS. or they call it Bridge OS, I think, but it's basically a variant. And one of the problems with that is that means increased surface area, which is, at the end of the day, a boon in getting to reuse software and a bane in the fact that means you have larger surface area you have to protect.
So essentially every Mac or Mac Pro now is shipping with a very powerful ARM processor, probably not orders of magnitude, but probably not that much more wimpy than the actual Intel processor running on the Mac Pro running most of the OS.
So is Apple shipping ARM laptops today? Yes, they are. I guess my comment there would be that just in sort of a little bit of a tangent to is Apple going to ditch Intel for ARM, their own ARM CPUs? I would say, given the October 30th town hall, whatever that was, news conference, man, the word Intel was not said a single time, but boy did they tout how cool their new CPUs are. And the A12X, is that what's in the new iPad Pro? The numbers on that are staggering. Now the A10 is not there. They're still in the 50,
that's a couple years old,
50% year over year improvement phase. But if you compare, so I wouldn't put the A10 up against the iMac Pro or anything like that, but I think you could easily put it up against the M chip that's in the that 12-inch not iMac, the 12-inch MacBook. The MacBook One that's
right.
super low powered, but also super, super wimpy. And, because in some of the A12X, and so sorry, bouncing it back and forth between these chips here a bit, but in some of the A12X, it was rivaling the Geekbench scores, at least, of the iMac Pro, which is their, starts at $5,000, goes up to $15,000 computer. And the Intel CPUs are a very, very spendy chunk of those systems. And I think it's very clear that Apple will be shipping a non-Intel based computer sometime in the next, if you ask me to bet, I'd say sometime in the next 2 years.
Well, I guess before I segue here, do you have any other?
I had one more comment. Actually, another sentence to read, which is that Apple's masked ROM rooted chain of trust through the efforts of Apple's engineers and security researchers worldwide has matured to one of the hardest targets in existence. Apple should be lauded for trying to bring their laptop and desktop lines into the same defensive posture as their mobile offerings. So basically, that's the the boot process that is on the phones. They're attempting to get that same level of control onto the laptops and desktops, which is frankly awesome. They're not not necessarily quite there yet, but desktop operating systems are it's just a much more open environment. So This says that that there will be another article in the series that focuses on the new attack surface and the underlying transports. The essentially because we didn't actually talk about that, but essentially there's a bus between the main CPU and the T2, and there's API there that you can play with. That's
Right.
One of the things that they'll interact with. But I love this article mainly because it taught me a bunch of stuff, a whole bunch that I will probably not remember the details of, but at least a little bit.
Yeah. Well, this actually segues right into a topic that caught my eye this week.
Okay.
We've known Windows 10 has supported ARM in various attempts over the last few years, but what was it? November 15th, Microsoft published an article that they now officially support ARM64 apps, and you can build ARM64 Microsoft Store. So I almost said App Store. Microsoft Store apps and submit them to the Microsoft App Store, which kind of the article is just interesting to read in general because it talks about how it does it and how to build a project, and it's just kind of, hey, here's just an introduction. Hey, if you want to start doing Windows 10 on ARM, we support even the more powerful chips now. But from a security perspective, as you just said, Apple basically has launched arguably the most successful malware protection in the industry, which they started with iOS by, the features they put around sandboxing, now this with the T2 chip, and they're just doing massive things with security and closing all sorts of holes that malware authors could leverage, and frankly that antivirus or malware defenders, those in the cyber security industry, also would use to monitor and look for bad behavior. So if you now have Windows 10 on ARM chips and the more powerful ARM chips, and Apple going to these more powerful custom designed ARM chips that will now start using pretty much a new architecture. I mean, the architecture that has been around for security and boot has been around forever. So what would be those, if you're able to start from scratch, which Apple did with iOS essentially, and Microsoft appears to be doing with the Windows 10 on ARM and their whole S mode initiatives, what does that mean for security vendors? And what does that mean? I think it's a good thing from the customer perspective, the end user perspective, because they benefit from closing of holes that were previously exploited. How do security vendors show value?
Well, the industry is as operating systems are closing many of the holes, the bad actors have moved, tactics, and don't generally use the same things they did before. And in fact, these days there's lots of activity in what's called or considered the fileless space. So
Right.
you have stuff that's not persistent on the endpoint. It's streamed, right? You either use the browser as a attack vector with hacking a site and having it pull down a miner, or we just talked the other week about having, what was that, like typo squatted names for pulling different libraries in that looked legit, but then would scrape forms, or the Bitcoin, or who was that? That was the Bitcoin wallet that had the stat counter hacked.
Right.
There's if there's anything the human race has taught us, is that humans will find a way, set the rules up. And that's also why, frankly, I think the EDR market in the security market has really taken off in the last, I'll say 5 years, which is becoming less about, hey, defend me from this piece of malware that you can identify with some known, identifier, signature, hash. Even hashes were busted long. That's why polymorphics came in. But signatures are certainly there. So there's where there's humans involved, there will still be a need. Is what I guess my general answer would be. But I'm very interested in the ways and places where the platform interfaces are. By that I mean, Windows or WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux, or versus classic Win32 or .NET code. And S mode is provided by a security feature of Windows called WDAC, and there's ways around that, and it'll be interesting to see. Microsoft is not taking a clean sheet approach. They are taking a what can we incrementally modify approach, because they have a very well, let's say they tried to take a clean sheet approach with WinRT. What was that, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that? It was a while back, and it flopped very, very hard. And so, I think that it's interesting to see them kind of increment themselves in that same direction here.
It just brought forward for me a little bit as well. The Microsoft and Apple are really not about the CPU, I guess, or the dominance that Intel has had in the market with the x86 is becoming less and less a relevant factor to being able to function and use software on any kind of machine.
I mean, the tricky bit for the ARM transition for Intel, and I was listening to I was probably Daring Fireball sometime in the last week. But the tricky bit for Apple in trying to go to ARM is when they went from the PowerPC to Intel had such a massive performance gain over the PowerPC that they were able to kind of cover over a lot of sins and emulate the apps with, what was it, Carbon, I think was the shim layer or something like that. I'm not and was not at the time a Mac developer. But anyway, so they had a lot of headroom to be able to sort of hide some of the platform transition problems with by maintaining compatibility with the other things. I don't believe that they will have that same luxury yet. Unless they were to kind of drag out the Intel transition and another few years and give themselves a massive boost. I don't think they'll quite have that amount of headroom. At the same time, so much stuff has gone to browsers these days that there's a lot to be said for the ability. I mean, just look at what you can do on a Chromebook these days. And then the other thing is that I don't buy the statements that were made by people from Apple that the fact that they submit apps to the App Store with bin code, I think it is, means that they can't recompile them on the server side. I believe that my nose, and maybe I'm just I'm a conspiracy theorist at heart or something like that, but I believe that there will come a time that Apple will be sufficiently motivated enough to discover, hey, look, we've had these people submitting apps to the App Store for 5 years now that are not actually, compiled down to x86 assembly. They're actually in bin code. And if we just write this interpreter, which, okay, sure, it takes us 100 people 2 years to write, but we can do that. Now, all of a sudden, every app that's been submitted to the App Store in the last 5 years will seamlessly work on ARM processors. And, then all they got to do is get a couple of the biggies that aren't submitting to the App Store. But, they did a bunch of work just this past year to get more people back to the App Store. I don't know. That's a conspiracy theory, I'm sure. But
yeah. No, but I just think it's going to be an interesting ride for the next few years in terms of Windows 10's success on ARM, how successful it becomes, and do the ARM chips continue, as Apple has shown they are able to basically beat the crap out of Intel chips to the point where people who need power out of chips start using ARM chips instead of Intel chips?
That is a very good question. Better pay attention.
All right. Well, we're going a little long. You want me to do my second kind of short topic, or we skip that?
You got to do it, because just the title of it. How do you can't not.
Okay. So there's a motherboard article that I stumbled across. The title is "How I Lost and Regained Control of My Microchip Implant." So, if you've ever been to DEF CON, it's a hacker conference in Las Vegas, and one of the things that has been popular over the last several years is a biohacking village, and you can go get an implant. A little NFC chip can get implanted into your hand, and then you can encode some amount of data on there to do whatever you want. It's an NFC chip, right? So somebody with an NFC reader could come read that, and you basically have your badge access is just your hand, or access to your phone or your computer is just your hand, whatever.
So I don't have to worry about losing or forgetting my employee badge ever again.
Right.
Yeah.
If you lose your hand, then you have other problems.
Then I would have other problems.
Right. So anyways, this guy, it's a short article that's kind of funny. It's about a guy who, went to Biohacking Village, got the little injection in his hand, and I got to find the line. And so the idea was he went in and he paid, and he thought it'd be cool to have this little thing, and then he would figure out what to do with it and figure out what he could do with it. And since he was at basically a hacker conference, the first thing he did was he put a pin on it so that someone, because if you can read from it, you can also write to it, so that someone didn't sneak up behind him when he was sleeping, or I don't know, when he wasn't paying attention, and encode something he didn't want in that chip, right? But the line in here was the first thing he did, he said, was I secured it with a 4-digit pin because I hadn't decided what I wanted to do with the chip, and I didn't want anybody else to write to that chip and lock him out. So he chose a pin, and he thought he did the right thing, but the best line in the whole thing is, if I had a single piece of advice for anyone thinking about getting an NFC chip implant, it would be to do it sober.
I think that is a good lesson for everything in life.
He couldn't remember the pin. He thought he did his phone number. Anyway, so a year had gone by. He went back the next year to DEF CON and contacted the company, and the company was explaining to him, well, you need to set the pin with our app. If you set it with some other app, and there's some other technical stuff behind it, but anyways, suffice it to say, after a year, and he finally got back into figuring it out, he found the original app that it got encoded with, got the pin in there, unencoded, then wrote with the company recommends that you set the pin for the first time with their app, and then you can do what you want with it. So, anyways, it's a funny little article about biohacking and losing access to a chip in your hand, and got me thinking, what would you do with the 900 bytes? That's all it could hold, was 900 bytes of data. So that's 3 good-sized tweets, a little bit more than 3 good-sized tweets, right? What would you put Would you put a picture? Would you put your address? What kind of thing would you put on
your master
chip
key
in
for
your
one
hand?
password?
Ooh, that's a good one. I didn't think of that. I'm gonna have to go get a chip implant now. Well, we should jump into something fun.
Okay, I had two something funs this week, so you got to bear with me. So my first something fun is kind of like fun with math, but in pop culture, which is not something that I have ever been accused of being good at or knowing anything about. But this is our pop song lyrics getting more repetitive. And so this link, you gotta follow the link in the notes. But this link is a guy who must be a CS person at some point, I guess, because he basically references Donald Knuth, who published a paper in 1977 called "The Complexity of Songs," and so he said, I'm going to test this hypothesis with data. So he's like, how do I measure the repetitiveness of a song? And the cool thing is that he used the Lempel-Ziv algorithm, which basically, it's a famous compression algorithm. You probably did it in college, an implementation of it. But, essentially it takes like repeatable patterns and then replaces, the longest repeatable string that it can, or the longest repeatable subset of something that it can, with a small bit. And for, so if you have the word "the," it might be replaced with just like one, 2 or 3 bytes or bits or something like that, because it's so frequent. Anyway, in a regular thing. But in this case, he used two things about this. He used Lempel-Ziv, and so it's essentially measuring the compressibility of lyrics, or using compressibility of lyrics as a proxy for repetitiveness. And he does a great job of like walking through the algorithm, and the page here is they did a great job on just the page design, because as it scrolls through, it does a this is just a great site. You could learn a lot of learn a little bit about computer science, learn a little bit about web design. Anyway,
it was cool enough that my 15-year-old daughter, I handed over to her, and she's not interested in high tech or technology or any of that. She's more theater and arts and music focused, but she really enjoyed reading through, and it kind of bridged that gap for her between the math and the science and interest in music and how music functions in pop culture. It was, I enjoyed it for that aspect.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's totally cool. So this is basically a whole, little mathematical thing of walking through. Okay, so we have the lyrics for, songs since the 1960s, and net, yes, they are. If you look at the chart, that's part way down the. Oh, sorry, I thought I was at the chart, but I wasn't. It has the repetitiveness by year, and it's not a straight line up. So, it looks like 1967 or so was probably the lowest repetitiveness, and 2014 was higher than 2015, for example. But anyway, yes, essentially the lyrics are getting more. And then the other fun fact that was here was that the songs that reached the top 10 were, on average, I'm quoting here, more repetitive than the rest in every single year from 1960 to 2015. So essentially, do humans like repetitiveness in music that is popular? Yes, they do. So anyway, I thought this was just a great site.
Yeah, I enjoyed the "Who's Responsible for This Madness," where they start to break it down by artist.
Right.
And you get to see which ones are most to blame.
Right. Yeah. So repetitiveness per artist. Right. So let's see, I'm looking at the aughts, the 00s. And so on the far left, so the lowest are George Strait, Tim McGraw, Brad Paisley, Lil Wayne, Eminem, etc. And then on the far right, Avril Lavigne, Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, Nickelback, Fall Out Boy. Anyway, so this was anyway. I thought this was a cool site, and for just many reasons. But check that out. That was something fun. And then
it's a fun read.
I'm sorry. So I'm gonna have to cut out a whole bunch of stuff this week. But okay, my second something fun, and I couldn't not do this either. It's a Library of Congress link to the first film version of Frankenstein ever. So this was in 1910, and it's a 13-minute silent film, and I guess that's it. But the Library of Congress has restored it. You can go out and just go to the link in here. You can watch it. It's not very long, and I won't spoil it. But A, Frankenstein is the scientist, not the monster, and B, it's totally cool to see at the very end. It came up and it said trademark Thomas A. Edison as kind of the title, title. That's totally cool. So 1910, so 108 years ago, was the first film adaptation of Frankenstein, and so
I will have to go watch that.
Go check that out.
Here. Yeah, cool. Well, my something fun. We'll just cut right into. It is Thanksgiving tomorrow.
It is,
or yesterday, depending on, or recently, depending on
when I get around to editing this.
But there was a fun article by 538 which talks about the side dishes of in America's region. So they took the most disproportionately common Thanksgiving side dishes by region. So they took the U.S. and they chopped it up and said, out of all the different side dishes that people serve at Thanksgiving, what does a region more disproportionately serve than other regions, or than other dishes? And some of these are hilarious. Out on the West Coast, pretty much everything, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and West, including Alaska and Hawaii, it's salad.
Salad? Who has
now? How
salad?
Boring is that?
Who has salad on Thanksgiving? I've lived my entire life in this place, and I'm racking my brain to see if we've had salad at Thanksgiving, but I anyway.
Yeah. Then let's see, Texas, Oklahoma. Oh, now I'm going to get my math. Is that Arkansas and Louisiana?
Louisiana, yeah. Cornbread.
Cornbread is most popular.
Now, I will agree with cornbread stuffing. I love cornbread stuffing. In fact, we will be having cornbread stuffing tomorrow.
But I have never heard of cornbread stuffing before.
Oh, God. Okay.
I'm sorry. I don't think I have ever had cornbread stuffing.
Okay. Maybe we can rectify that at some point here. Cornbread stuffing is delicious.
Then you go up above and you've got green bean casserole. Now, I remember having green bean casserole as a kid, and I don't remember if it was a Thanksgiving thing or what, but that's
we have green bean casserole.
North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin.
You don't have to treat this as a state test. It's okay.
I know.
You don't have to name all the states.
I'm just going to get, the further east I go, the worse I'm going to get.
Right.
Because I've lived my whole life in the West.
Right.
And then you've got rolls and biscuits.
Who doesn't have biscuits?
Then mac and cheese. Down in South Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas.
That is unholy.
Mac and cheese.
You don't have mac and cheese on Thanksgiving. I'm sorry.
I like mac and cheese.
I love mac and cheese
for Thanksgiving.
I gotta say I'm a total traditionalist. I'm a turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, gravy. Like and many of those things, the primary objective is to convey gravy.
Just gravy delivery
Yeah.
mechanisms.
Although I must say I've gotten into the cranberry the last couple of years. We have a great cranberry chutney recipe that we make, and I do enjoy that.
Well, and then I guess the last one is squash. In the Northeast, you've got squash up Maine to Pennsylvania in that area.
Well, we are doing squash. This is hilarious. So essentially, we will have everything there. Well, that's not true because it's cornbread stuffing, not cornbread. We will have. I guess I identify most strongly with the upper Midwest to East. Green bean casserole, rolls, and squash will all be on our table, but mac and cheese, cornbread, and salad will not.
So you just said you're a traditionalist. Do you have any things that you like to have for Thanksgiving that aren't traditional?
I
can't think of any for myself.
I'm trying to think.
Either.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say that I prefer pecan pie to pumpkin pie. Although I like pumpkin pie, so I will probably have both if I can. I like. Let's see. Is there anything else that I mean, I guess we're gonna have some friends over, so I gotta say, so some friends of ours cooked us basically a Thanksgiving dinner this past weekend, and they invited us over because they're like, look, we want to cook a turkey, but we're coming over to your house for Thanksgiving, so why don't you guys come over and we'll have a pre-Thanksgiving dinner, and and I'm like, okay, because I like Thanksgiving dinner, but their big thing was like creamed onions, which is kind of I'd never had before. But they were delicious. So when they were like, so what all are we bringing for Thursday? I was like, hey, you're bringing these
creamed onions.
They're like whole, like what do you call them? Shallots, I guess. Small onions, like basically bite size.
Right.
Anyway, those were tasty. But no, I would guess I don't think I do anything weird. I must say that I grew up with stovetop, and I do like stovetop stuffing. So, hate me. That's fine. Although we have the last couple of years moved to a cornbread stuffing that is I must say generally better. And there was some year, a couple years ago, that Shirley did this whole bacon stuffing thing, bacon in the stuffing, which was, oh my gosh, tremendous. But I don't think we're doing that this year.
The only thing I remember, which is from my family, so my wife's family has a whole, they do their thing, but the one thing I remember as a kid, you remember the cranberry in the can?
Oh, yeah.
Where you then cut off one end and then it kind of slithers out as a whole cylindrical tube
thing. Yes.
And then we would slice that up into tiny little Amazon Echo Dots, right? And then
and lay them out.
And then lay them out
like cards. Yeah.
That's probably the one weird thing that I still really like. My wife was not a big fan, but she came around eventually. So
I have come around.
I'm sure that is somewhere.
The bad thing is that I think what started me eating cranberry sauce because that's really been the last 4 or 5 years for me. Before that, I was always no way. But it was the Swedish meatballs at IKEA.
Exactly. Because it's
the lingonberry, whatever. I was like, wow.
Similar
and it was an accident at first. They like threw it on there, and I was like, okay, whatever. And Shirley, I think Shirley in fact said, you should at least try it. A lot of people like that. And I did, and I was like, evidently I'm enough of an adult that my mind is now open to new things these days. And I was like, oh, dang, this is really, really good. So anyway, but all right.
Yeah.
Well, have a wonderful Thanksgiving tomorrow and or 2 days ago.
You too.
And we will talk again next week, I guess.
Awesome.